I've been an independent UX and UI designer for 13 years. I've taught design to over 5,000 students around the globe. And today we're going to talk about 6 of my favorite advanced user interface design tips. So if you have a design that's pretty good, here are 6 things to think about in making it awesome. And of course, as AI quickly becomes able to bring a design from 0 to good enough, this extra level of polish is going to become more and more important. So let's dive in. For this tutorial, let's work on this one-page website for a design workshop. Nice. This Figma file is linked below so you can duplicate it and follow along at home. Okay, so the design here, it's a bit bland, right? But there is decent spacing, there's decent alignment, the typography is not terrible. It's not like immediately obvious how we're going to make this awesome, but that is our goal today. And actually, let's be really specific about our goals, because as I repeat ad nauseum to my students, if you aren't clear on your design goals, you're only going to achieve them on accident. So our goals are a crafted, thoughtful visual design that makes viewers go, ooh, cool. And also, of course, we want to allow people to sign up for the workshop. But as you can tell, this is mostly going to be about visual design. So let's get started. Tip number 1, match your font and your brand. So fonts are a set of vector shapes. Your brand is like a list of adjectives or ideas or values. Yet a great designer has to be able to tie these things together, one's shapes and one's brand. Now, I believe that there's like essentially only 5 major brands that most projects fit into. And this is a framework that I cover in Learn UI Design. And I've actually linked the free preview of the brand lesson from that course below. So anyhow, using the 5 major brands framework, this project, I would say, kind of falls under both techie and fancy. I'd say techie because it's about interface design. It's about something technical and cutting edge. And I'd say fancy because it's really emphasizing the craft and precision, which those are values that fancy or formal or luxury brands often emphasize. So the question is, how do we match a font to those brands? Techie fonts tend to be pretty geometric, angular, squared off. Fancy fonts, obvious, they're often serifs, or maybe they're sans serifs that take inspiration from handwriting. At first, these requirements might seem irreconcilable, and one option is we just use multiple fonts. But I do know a great font I'm really stoked to try out, and it fits into both categories. And that font is Signifier by Chris Soursby. So this is a super unique font that in many ways, it looks like an old style serif, right? But unlike basically any font in that category, it's got these perfectly angular points. It's got a lot of straight lines that kind of comprise the letter forms. And so it really nicely walks this line between something that alludes to the old and classic, and yet is done in this very modern digital way. So I'm going to take this design and I'm going to start by just making everything into that font. And I only have the trial version of Signifier, so I might be missing some characters and features that are in the full font, but it should work for today's demo. I'm going to start by making the title much, much bigger, like something like size 80. And then also, this is an important line, I can bump up the size here. All right, so now we're using this great font. It's not quite there yet. What are we going to do? Well, that's my second strategy. Number 2, look for gold in your fonts. A great designer doesn't just settle for using a good font. They're going to actively look for the little nuggets of gold in that typeface. Like maybe it's a different weight, maybe it's italics, maybe it's using the font in uppercase. It always depends on what the font is and what the brand is. To me, this bold headline looks a little bit too chunky, so I'm going to explore the different weights and kind of see if anything looks really good. I'm also going to do things like play around with italics. This next session label would be a classic place to use uppercase, but in general, uppercase doesn't look as reliably good in a serif font as it does in a sans serif. So I'll actually just use another font here, Rajdhani from Google Fonts. Again, I'm going to explore the weights and kind of see what feels right in the context of the design here. And I'll give the button and the label the same treatment. Another interesting way to spice up typography is to use less commonly used typographical characters. So I like to do an M dash, which is Option-Shift-Dash on Mac. It's really long, it looks kind of exotic, but it also does a really great job sort of separating the date from the time here and looking designed and intentional. And maybe I'll also continue playing around with italics just to further distinguish, hey, this is one piece of information, this is a second. Already, this is much better, but even looking at this, there's a couple changes that I'm just itching to make, and both of them have to do with our next tip, which is Understand the logic of spacing. All right, so white space comes in different flavors. There's space between elements, there's space between paragraphs, there's space between lines, there's even space between individual characters. A great designer should understand the different reason for including each of those different types of space so that they can do it well, right? So the change I wanted to make is tightening the letter spacing of the header. And when I bring it tighter, it gives the header kind of a punchier, crisper feel. And the exact value I'm gonna play around with, but even if I go back to 0% here, this feels not optimal. Like I know I want it to be, let's say, even -1%. On the other hand, uppercase text often needs positive letter spacing. So I go in, add some here, I'm at 7%. This is probably too much given the context here, but even something closer to 3 or 4% looks awesome. Now what's going on here? It's all about legibility. Most fonts are designed to be legible at sentence case text, body text sizes. So when you display text really big, there's more space between the characters than is necessary for your eye, so you can tighten it up. And when you display text smaller, but in uppercase, you're making it harder for the eye to distinguish one letter from the next, and so therefore, adding in some letter spacing is going to help with legibility. Let's also talk about line spacing because that's something I want to fix up here. Line spacing is all about readability, letting the user's eyes go from the end of one line to the beginning of the next. So when there's many characters per line and the lines are long, you need more space. For something like this H1, it doesn't even need to be 120%, right? It can be much closer. Something like 100% is going to be fine, but the lower bound is I don't want the descenders of G or Y to crash into the characters below. Now, as far as the space between the elements, that's all about relatedness. Right now, these session details are equidistant from the H1 above, that's 48 pixels, and the form below, 48 pixels again. So logically, that implies the session details are about as related to the title of the workshop as they are to the sign-up form. And that feels about right. If anything though, I would say maybe because you RSVP for a specific session, these are a little bit more related. So I can try and just sort of bring that space down a little bit, maybe 38 pixels. But you'll see anything tighter just really kind of feels off. Like this already, I don't like this. So maybe I'll bring it down a little bit and leave it like that. For more on the topic of spacing, check out my interactive typography tutorial, which is linked below. Okay, so now we've done a bunch of tinkering with the elements that are in front of us. It's time to talk about the elephant in the room, which is this big, boring, blue background. What are we gonna do about it? Well, that's tip number 4. Do what is hard to do in Figma. What's this mean? So in general, the things that our tools make easier, you're gonna see a lot more of. And the things that our tools make harder, you're gonna see a lot less of. They're gonna be more fresh and more interesting if they look good. So let's use this idea to try and add a background that's maybe a little bit harder to do in Figma. I'm still gonna make something in Figma, but I'll do something that involves a little bit more work. In particular, I'm kind of inspired by the light that comes out of a prism. I think that looks cool. Like maybe I'll do something like that. It's not obvious how you would do it in Figma, at least not to a beginner. And spoiler alert, it's probably gonna require some experimentation here. But let's try, let's see if we can get something that looks kind of fresh. All right, I'm gonna start by kind of putting the colors of the prism out there, primary colors. We'll do a blue, a red, a yellow. And I'm gonna go ahead and I'm just gonna give every one of them a giant blur. Now they're already kind of covering each other up, so I'm gonna play with blend modes and opacities to try and allow them to shine through each other. So I'm going to the lighter blend modes, lighten, screen, plus lighter, color dodge. These ones seem pretty cool. Overlay, soft light are also good. In general, these ones up here darken, and that's not the kind of thing I want. I'm gonna duplicate the red one just to get a little more red flavor in here. It looks like the sun, but I don't need it to be that intense. And maybe the second red I'll have more on the pink side of red because the first one is more on the orange. Now, I'll be honest, as much as I try to explain the logic of every little design decision here, at some point, this pile of blend modes and opacities and blurs, it just requires tinkering, right? But here, now I've ended up with something that at least for now, at least at first glance, it looks pretty cool. And like I said, it's not really obvious how to recreate something like this in Figma easily. It's one of those things where, because it's a little bit harder to do, it's gonna feel a little bit fresher. All right, now I wanna turn my sights towards this input box, which at least right now is currently the worst part of this design. Tip number 5, incorporate real-world materials. So one place where great design really sweats the details is materials. And I'm not saying you need perfect glass or metal skeuomorphism in every little design, but that's also kind of the point. You don't need it, so when you have it, it's going the extra mile. And that's what we're gonna do here is we're gonna make this look like a glass input, and we'll have this button be metallic. So for frosted glass, the most important thing is it needs to have a background blur. And in order for a background blur to work, the fill opacity, not the layer opacity, the fill opacity needs to be lower. So even something like 20% is good. Now, I'll then have the fill not be white. I'm gonna have it be off-white and the same hue as the background color, just to give it a little bit more saturation and richness to the final color here. And of course, now this text actually does need to be white, and I will give this a rounded corner. Since it's 48 pixels tall, a rounded corner means 24. And if the rounding is 24, the horizontal padding should also be 24. And there we go. This is looking pretty nice. Now, one issue here though is you can't actually see it's frosted, right? Since the background doesn't change at all. And even if I bring it over our kind of colored area, the background doesn't change quickly enough for anything to actually get blurred here. Let's note that though. We're gonna come back to it. For now, let's talk about some other effects that we're gonna wanna do to make this look like frosted glass. First, we're gonna want a sheen on the top. And I technically could do this with a stroke, but it's easier to implement in code with a shadow. So I'm actually gonna put an inner shadow here. It's gonna be white. I'm gonna give it 0 blur. It's actually gonna be a little bit thinner here. And it can have a fairly strong opacity. Now this is where the light source, which is at the top, hits the glass and reflects some of that light into our eye. Normal materials do that at the top edge, but not at the bottom edge. Glass, however, can also do it at the bottom edge. So I'm gonna take this layer and I'm gonna duplicate it. And then I'm gonna go and put a similar sheen on the bottom edge. Now, even stranger, glass can have a brighter sheen on the bottom edge than it does on the top. For most normal materials, this would be total nonsense, but for glass, it's just one of those visual effects that makes it look kind of cool or different. And then I'm gonna do one other thing here. I'm gonna make this glass text area feel a little bit convex, like it's popping out of the page. So in order to do that, I'm gonna go and put another fill layer, and the fill layer is gonna go from 100% opacity white to 0% opacity white. It's going to do that such that the top is a little bit lighter and the bottom is a little bit darker. The overall fill opacity though can be quite low. So right now it's at 20, that's too much. Even 10 feels like kind of about where I wanna be. This is gonna be a pretty subtle effect. By the way, if all this lighting stuff is new to you, check out my blog post bit on Light Comes from the Sky, which is linked below. Okay, now let's make this button metallic. I'm actually gonna start by copying all of the glass properties, and I'm just going to paste them right on. Already, this looks pretty cool, but let's go ahead and make this a truly different material. So I'm actually going to give it a linear gradient fill as well. It's going to be 100%. And we're just going to go ahead and start from, let's say, kind of an off gray. Again, I'm gonna grab the same hue to start out with and go from a very light color to slightly darker. Now we'll need the text to actually be darker because the button is so light. So that's no problem. And then this bottom edge should no longer be bright, but instead should be a little bit darker. I'm also gonna go ahead and give this thing an outer shadow. It can be pretty subtle, like the Y is gonna be small, the blur is not gonna be any more than 4, because this button is just sitting right on top of the glass. And finally, we can give this whole unit its own shadow as well. So fly in here, do that. This one's gonna have a sizably more blur because now this input form can be floating above the surface of the screen a little bit more. And it's also gonna have a higher opacity simply because the background is already so dark. Now there's only one other place in this interface where I'm gonna go and mimic real world lighting and texture, and that's with this horizontal line here that's sort of dividing a fictional top nav from the rest of the screen. So I'm gonna make this divider seem indented into the screen, which means the top pixel is angled away from the light source at the top and therefore should be a little bit darker. And the bottom pixel is angled towards the light source and will be a little bit lighter. It's probably kind of difficult to see here, and this is something where you can play around with it. and maybe even view the sample file yourself. But if I do this right, it will subtly give off vibes of being three-dimensional and kind of indented into the screen. All right, with all that being done, let's come back to the frosted glass text box. Tip number 6, design judo. Emphasize X by de-emphasizing Y. Okay, so we've identified that this frosted glass text box doesn't actually look frosted. It doesn't have a background with contrast below it. What are we gonna do about it? Rather than thinking about the element directly, let's think about the background. Rather than trying to change the styling of the button to something else, let's actually give some subtle change to the background such that the blur can be seen on the button. This is one of the many instances of what I call design judo. Making element A look good is actually about styling element B. So in our case, I'm gonna add a subtle background specifically so that it goes below this glass text box. For this, I'm gonna grab one of the vector illustrations from Semplis's Warped Universe illustration pack. And shout out to them because they've generously allowed this to be included for free for all students of Landing Page Academy, and both the assets and that course are linked below. Now, this looks super cool, but subtlety is kind of the name of the game here. So I'm gonna be looking for a way to kind of make some of this feel not so in your face. One strategy that comes to mind is I can use a mask. So I'm gonna create an oval layer here, and I'm gonna give it a gradient fill from the center where it'll have a white with 100% opacity to the edges where it'll have white with 0% opacity. If I then use this as a mask and I put it in the same folder as the assets here, it'll make the asset fade out at the edges, which is super cool. And now I'm basically just gonna adjust the size and the position of all of this stuff to get things feeling right. And to be honest, when I'm going from a boring design to an interesting design, it's so often just a matter of throwing a bunch of ideas onto some frames and really playing with permutations and fiddling until you get things feeling just right. So just know it's not quite as linear as what I've shown in this video. All right, so now let's take a look at the finished design. We started with this, which is neat. It's clean, but it's kind of boring. And we got to this, which is much more interesting, much more eye-catching. That's awesome. Along the way, we've talked about more advanced design tips for typography, for layout, for design process, and more. If you like this kind of content, every single idea from this video is in my course, Learn UI Design, which covers in painstaking detail the logic behind visual design decisions. If you want to make sites or apps look great, but you lack the skills or you lack the confidence, check out Learn UI Design. There's over 5,000 students already. You'll be in good company. Or if you just want some free design tips, hop on my newsletter, Design Hacks, where I send out original short design tutorials to 60,000 of my closest friends. All right, that's everything for now. Which of these tips will you use first? Let me know in a comment below. If you do, this is how I feel. Other than that, we'll see you next time.